tonight, it's official. After months of negotiations, Australia and Malaysia have finally signed an historic deal to swap asylum seekers for verified refugees. The Prime Minister, Julia Gillard, claims it will smash the business model of people smugglers, something we'll be able to test in the coming months. Some long-term refugees in Malaysia say they now have new hopes of being able to resettle in Australia. But there are concerns that aspects of the deal might still give asylum seekers an incentive to head for Australia. Southeast Asia correspondent Zoe Daniel filed this report from Kuala Lumpur.
It's a typical Sunday morning in this tiny flat in Kuala Lumpur. Its 23 inhabitants are getting ready for church. They're all from Burma, part of the Chin minority, and they've fled persecution and forced labour at home. Like all refugees here, they have no rights to work, education or healthcare, and they're desperate to leave what's effectively a transit stop that can last years.
Here in Malaysia, we can't have stable jobs all the time, so it's very hard to work here.
Life here is a type of limbo. Malaysia doesn't accept any permanent refugees, so they can't stay, but they have nowhere else to go until they're offered a place in a third country. As the largest group, the Chin will benefit from the refugee swap.
When I heard this news, this is for us, for refugees, stranding in Malaysia is big news, very good news. We accept, welcome news very much.
Refugee and spokesman Patrick Sangbawi Hanin also believes the deal will benefit those who don't make the list.
Because of these swap deals, all eyes will be on this government of how 800 people are treated. So, as a consequence, we hope that the rest of the refugees already stranding here will profit from that.
Once they're registered as refugees and put on a waiting list by the UNHCR, they're supposed to be immune, but they're still frequently targeted, and if they can't pay bribes, they pay in other ways. These two young men tell us how immigration police raided the flat where they were staying last year. Both received 3 strokes of the cane for being falsely branded illegal immigrants when they're in fact confirmed refugees who've fled persecution.
When I was stroked the second time, I felt very dizzy. And then the third time, I was losing consciousness, the pain was so bad.
But Chin refugees have something very specific to pray for, a new life in Australia. Historically, the Chin haven't turned to people smugglers to escape conditions in Malaysia, but others who tend to wait longer for resettlement have. Now working to save money for another attempt, these recently arrived Iraqis were promised just 2 weeks in detention and an Australian passport by a people smuggler who escorted them from Yemen.
So how did you arrange to take a boat? How hard is that?
Our translator, Khalid Atimimi, is a refugee himself. He runs this hair salon funded by an Iraqi benefactor and took the 2 newcomers in when their plans to take the boat to Australia fell through a month ago.
He said, if I have money now, I will try again.
They handed over their life savings, $5,000 each, but the broker took off with the cash, leaving them destitute. Khalid claims only 3 Iraqi families have been resettled out of Malaysia during his time here. That's why people are desperately hoping extra legal places in Australia will now lead to their resettlement. But the new refugee agreement by Australia and Malaysia is supposed to act as a deterrent to people smuggling, according to Immigration Minister Chris Bowen.
I'm very glad that Australia is able to take 4,000 more refugees under this process. This is a win for Malaysia, a win for Australia, and a loss for the people smugglers.
People who are sent to Malaysia under the deal will initially be placed in a detention centre, partly funded and monitored by Australia. The asylum seekers will then be issued with ID cards and will be released with the right to work. But refugee advocates here say that creates a two-tiered system and is unfair to long-term refugees.
All refugees and asylum seekers in Malaysia, they need to work. They need to have access to education. They need to have good hospitalization in Malaysia. So it shouldn't be any specific to be given there. So the whole community needs this.
There are almost 100,000 refugees in Malaysia. It's arguably the largest refugee transit point in the world, and in reality, there is no queue. They make up only a small percentage of the refugees here, but those from Afghanistan are among those who've been waiting the longest, yet they rarely get offered resettlement. Rajab is the elder statesman of the group.
I have a question myself to ask. That I've been living the life of a refugee for the past 34 years. I got married as a refugee. I've had children as refugees, and I have had 8 grandchildren as refugees. How long shall I be a refugee more?
In the 5 years that Rajab's been waiting in Malaysia, he says only 5 Afghan families who've fled war have been resettled through official channels. About 20 to 30 families from this community have taken boats to Australia, and he says most have been given refugee status. But some died when their boat crashed onto the rocks on Christmas Island in December. Rajab's wife Serena can barely speak when she tries to explain to me why they took the boat.
Our main concern is our children. We think a lot of our kids. We have been in this country for the past 5 years. But if our kids were 5, they are now 10. If they were 10, they are now 15. So every day of their life is passing by without any proper education and any future.
After wasting their lives as refugees, these women now see the same happening to their children.
I want to change everything, that I have no problem. I have many problems. I don't want problems in my life, but I have many problems in Iran and here too.
12-year-old Sajida doesn't care where she goes as long as it's away from here.
I just need a country that needs refugees and help us. Our ambition with us.
About a third of those in detention in Australia are Afghans, and most came by boat. The big fear in this group is that from now on, Afghan asylum seekers will be sent to Malaysia and offered the reward of better conditions here, as well as increasing the number vying for the rare offers of resettlement. And far from solving the problem with this level of desperation, that may push more back to the boats.
Zoe Daniel reporting from Kuala Lumpur.